This is a story so raw, it leaves a knot in your chest, set beneath a merciless Texas sun, where dust chains and silence collide. It's a place where broken lives cross paths with buried guilt, and fate waits quietly for its moment. It all begins with a single bid at a hidden auction, small, almost careless, yet powerful enough to change two lives forever. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The rattle of chains came first, then the sharp snap of a whip. Then nothing at all. Beneath the brutal Texas sun, a young woman stood barefoot on a splintered wooden platform, her wrists cinched tight with rusted iron. The prairie settlers watched her, the way men study cattle cold, appraising already deciding her worth. Behind her, Harlan Dobbs wore a crooked grin, sweat carving lines down his neck. 4 years after the Civil War was supposed to have buried slavery, for good places like this still survived hidden barns, quiet back roads where desperate lives were traded like unpaid debts far from the law's reach. 17 Dobbs called out. No husband, no kin. Sold 3 times already. Won't speak, won't work. $5 to open. In a world that prized strong backs and quick hands, a silent girl like her was seen as useless, too worn down by the war's shadow to bring more than loose change. No one raised a hand. Someone near the front spat into the dirt. Not worth a dime, not worth. Her name was Clara Boone. Her dress hung in rags, dust clinging to her skin, dark hair plastered to her face, half hiding a bruise along her cheekbone. She stared at the boards beneath her feet, unmoving. She had learned long ago that tears bought nothing here. Then a voice cut through the heat, low, steady, unshaken. I'll pay 20. Heads turned. At the back of the crowd stood a man in a faded brown coat bills crushed tight in his fist. His name was Caleb Boone, 56 years old. Gray stubble lined his jaw, the face of a man who hadn't smiled in years. Dobbs blinked. 20, you sure about that? Caleb nodded once. The gavel struck wood. Sold. Clara didn't react. She didn't even look at him. Caleb stepped forward and removed his hat. When he finally saw her face clearly, his breath caught. That scar, small, curved just above her wrist. 8 years ago, he had wrapped that wound himself. He remembered a little girl hiding behind her father's leg, asking if the mark would stay. He'd told her no. He'd been wrong. Dobbs shoved her forward. Clara stumbled, and Caleb caught her before she hit the boards. Her skin burned with fever. She looked up at him for the first time, green eyes hollowed out. He whispered her name. Clara. No response. Just the faintest flicker, like a memory half buried under years of loss, then gone. People like her learned fast not to trust familiar faces. Either she didn't remember him, or she did, and wished she didn't. Outside, the gavel echoed again. Another life sold. Another soul erased. Caleb counted out his last bills, pressed them into Dobbs's palm, and led her away. The dirt road stretched ahead beneath a merciless sky. Clara followed a few steps behind him, chains whispering with every move, each sound a reminder of the debt he carried. He didn't know if she would ever understand why he did this. Maybe she never would. As the barn door slammed shut, he felt the past breathing down his spine. 8 years ago, Elias Boone's greed had destroyed the Boone family's name and condemned Samuel Boone's household to ruin. Now the last piece of that family walked beside Caleb, silent, broken, alive. As the sun dipped low and dust rose around their boots, Caleb knew the ghosts of that day would not leave him until he told her the truth. But how did you ask forgiveness from someone who didn't even know who you were? The road ran on for miles. Once they were clear of the barn, Caleb reined in the horses. He took a key from his pocket and unlocked her chains. No one should wear these in a free country, he muttered, thinking of promises made after the war. Promises already cracked and fading. He rode slow. Clara followed on a smaller mare. Head bowed, silent, except for the faint clink of iron still circling her wrist. Caleb could feel her fear pressing against him, thick as heat rising off the dirt. Whenever he glanced back, she kept her eyes on the dirt, never once meeting his gaze. They stopped beneath a wide oak, its heavy branches casting the only shade for miles. Caleb Boone swung down, tied the horses, and drew a small canteen from his saddlebag. He approached slowly, careful not to crowd her. "Here," he said, voice low. She stiffened, studying him, as if he might lash out without warning. After a long pause, she reached for it. Her hands shook as she clasped the canteen, fingers tight. Her eyes narrowed wariness, carved by years of broken promises since the war's end, measuring him before she let herself accept the kindness. She took a single swallow, wiped her mouth, then lifted her eyes to him for the first time. Her voice was soft, but it cut deep. "Guess you got what you paid for. Do whatever you want." Caleb went still. For a heartbeat that stretched too long, he forgot how to breathe. The words struck harder than lead. He lowered himself to one knee, slow, making sure she could see his open hands. "I didn't buy you to own you," he said. "I just didn't want them selling you again." She gave a short, bitter laugh. "You think that makes it better?" He had no answer. None that would ring true. They sat beneath the oak heat, pressing in silence, spreading wide between them. Caleb stared at his boots, dust clinging to sweat-dark leather. "I knew your family," he said at last. "Your father was a good man. I should have done more when they came for him." Clara Boone turned her face away, voice flat. "That's what everyone says after it's too late." The wind rose, rattling leaves overhead. She stood, canteen still in hand, and walked back toward her horse. Caleb didn't stop her. He knew he'd earned every ounce of that anger. He set his hat back on and followed. Hooves echoed across the hills, hollow and steady like a heart trying to find its old rhythm. He wondered how many miles it would take before she stopped seeing him as the enemy, if that day would ever come. In the quiet between them, one thought burned on. What would she do when she learned the truth? By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was slipping behind the hills. The land lay wide and still a place so worn that even the wind sounded tired. Caleb untied the horses, pressed a crust of bread into Clara's hand, and pointed to the small cabin. "Inside," he said. She hesitated, eyes flicking to the lone bed and the cold stove, then stepped in slow, cautious, like a stray testing new ground. For days the ranch stayed quiet. Clara worked without a word, feeding the horses, hauling water, scrubbing floors until her hands split. Caleb patched fences, set the roof right, and tried not to watch her too closely. They moved like two ghosts, sharing the same stretch of earth. But out here, silence never held for long. On the third day, 3 riders appeared on the road. Caleb saw the dust first, then the flash of a badge in the sun. Marshal Wade Turner, a man who once called himself the Law. The same man who had led troops to burn the Boone farm to cinders. Turner dismounted slow, a crooked smile forming. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. His eyes slid past Caleb to the woman behind the fence, narrowing at the scar on her wrist. The scar from that night, 8 years ago, caught the light, and for the briefest moment, the smirk slipped from Marshal Wade Turner's face. In this country, the past didn't stay buried for long. "Well now," Turner said, voice low. "That's a face I never figured I'd see again." Clara Boone went rigid. Her fingers tightened around the fence rail until her knuckles bleached white. Caleb Boone stepped forward, placing himself squarely between them. "You've had your look," he said, calm but firm. Turner let out a short laugh. Buying up lost girls now, Caleb, or she meant to keep you warm after dark. Caleb didn't move, but the air shifted tight, dangerous, the kind of stillness that came just before a gun cleared leather. I paid for her freedom, Caleb said. His voice stayed even. Not her body. Turner eased closer, one hand resting near the grip at his hip. That's real noble. But I remember that name, Boone. Her father was a traitor. The same lie Turner had always used. The excuse that justified the raid, the torching of a farm, the theft of land, and the chaos after Appomattox. Clara's breath caught in her chest. Her grip on the rail tightened. Flames flashed through her mind, smoke shouting the crack of burning wood. She wanted to throw the truth in his face, but silence had kept her alive this long, in a world still pretending it had healed. Caleb's jaw hardened. She's under my protection, he said. Turner chuckled. Then he reached into his coat and drew out a single bullet. He set it carefully on the fence post between them. A reminder, he murmured. Some ghosts don't stay buried. When the Iron Spur deputies finally rode off, the dust they left behind felt heavier than before. Clara picked up the bullet, turning it between her fingers. Who was that? She asked softly. Caleb didn't answer. Not yet. He kept his eyes on the dying light at the horizon. Fire and screams still lived behind his eyes. He knew this wasn't finished. And when Wade Turner returned, blood would follow. That night, the wind rose hard across the ranch, carrying the scent of rain and old memories. Caleb sat beside the small fire inside the cabin, flames dancing across the rough plank walls. Clara sat opposite him, silent as ever, her face half lost in shadow. Since Turner's visit, neither of them had spoken. But silence has a way of dragging truth to the surface. What really happened that night? Caleb stared into the fire for a long while. The flames twisted and jumped, shadows moving like restless spirits. When he finally spoke, each word fell slow and heavy. My father, Elias Boone, sold your family out for their land after the war. I heard him talking to the soldiers. I rode hard to warn your father. He paused, but I was too late. The place was already burning. His jaw tightened. I was a coward. I lived. They didn't. Clara said nothing. She picked up the watch and closed her fingers around it. Her knuckles turned white, her hand trembling as if she might throw it into the fire and be done with the past. But memory held fast. Echoes of a life before the war, when families like hers believed in a better America. You think telling me this makes it better? She asked. No, Caleb said quietly. It doesn't. But you deserve to know who you're standing next to. They sat there without speaking. The fire hissed and popped between them while thunder rolled across the hills like the land itself, remembering what men tried to bury. At last, Clara spoke again, her voice barely above a breath. If your father did all that, why are you the one carrying the guilt? Caleb looked up. His eyes were worn but steady. Because I was there. Because I did nothing. And because I'm still breathing when they're not. The fire cracked sharply. Clara looked at him, and for the first time since they'd met, the anger in her eyes wavered. It didn't disappear. It fractured. As if something inside her was struggling to understand. Before she could speak again, another sound cut through the storm and the thunder of hooves, fast and close. Caleb reached for his gun. Sometimes the past didn't knock twice. The hooves faded, swallowed by the night, leaving only the dying fire's crackle. Caleb stood by the door, revolver still in his hand, eyes fixed on the rain pouring down. Clara sat near the hearth, and the silver watch clenched tight. Neither spoke. But the silence had changed, not cold, not angry, just heavy with everything laid bare. By morning, the storm had passed. The sky stood washed clean, pale light spreading across the ranch. Caleb went out to mend a broken stretch of fence hands, steady despite the ache of years and regret. He didn't hear Clara approach until she spoke behind him. "You're doing it wrong?" Her tone was dry, almost teasing. He turned. She held the hammer hair loose and tangled dress still damp from the night before. Without another word, she stepped in beside him and set to work. They labored side by side for hours, no talking, just wood iron and wind. And somewhere in that quiet rhythm, something began to shift. Not love, not yet, but something close to peace. After that night of confession, Caleb Boone set to work, carving simple boards of pine believing. Clara Boone deserved a place to honor what had been taken from her. Across the state, small markers were rising everywhere. Quiet memorials for souls lost in the long shadow of war. By dusk, Caleb had planted 2 modest wooden crosses near the fence line. He carved the names himself, one bearing Samuel Boone, the other marked only family. When Clara saw them, the tears she had held back for 8 long years finally broke free. She knelt in the dirt, tracing each letter with careful fingers, as if memorizing the shape of the truth. Then she stood across the yard and pressed the silver watch into Caleb's palm. "I think it's time you keep it," she said softly. He shook his head. "No, it belongs to them." She smiled, small, worn, but real. "Then let it stay here." That night she didn't sleep, curled near the door. She took the chair by the window, instead eyes lifted to the stars. Caleb sat across the room, and for the first time in years he felt his chest loosen enough to draw a full breath. Days rolled into weeks. Clara stayed. She stitched torn shirts, put seeds in the ground, and once when Caleb slipped in the mud, handed him a plank without a word. Trust formed in those small exchanges, the way families rebuilt after the war, board by board. The ghost that had lingered over the ranch began to thin. Forgiveness, it seemed, didn't arrive in a single moment. It grew, quietly, like grass pushing through scorched earth. And maybe that was healing after all, something slow and stubborn choosing life, where ashes once lay. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blaze the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal/disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice imagery, and drafting as part of our creative process. But every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deepfakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.